The day my daughter-in-law threw my gift into the trash, everyone in the room laughed. 3 weeks later, the same people sat frozen at my dining room table when they discovered she had just tossed away a dead man's final gift and nearly destroyed a $47,000 inheritance. What made it worse was that she did it on camera. She thought she had won that day. She thought she had embarrassed the quiet old woman who still made things by hand. What she did not know was that my late husband had spent 30 years preparing a surprise for a grandchild he would never live to meet. And she had dropped that surprise straight into a garbage can. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 68 years old, and for most of my life I owned a small sewing shop in Ohio. I spent decades repairing wedding gowns, tailoring suits, and teaching young mothers how to sew baby clothes. I never became rich, but I learned something money cannot teach. The value of a thing is not always visible. That lesson became the center of the biggest family disaster I have ever witnessed. 10 months before all of this happened, I lost my husband, Walter. We had been married for 43 years. Walter was the kind of man people overlooked because he never bragged. He drove old trucks, wore worn-out jackets, and spent more time helping neighbors than talking about himself. But Walter had one dream he talked about constantly. He wanted to be a grandfather. Unfortunately, life had other plans. Our son Ethan and his wife Lauren struggled for years before finally expecting their first child. By the time the good news arrived, Walter was already fighting the illness that would eventually take him from us. A week before he passed away, he asked me to bring him an old wooden box from the top shelf of our closet. I had seen that box for decades but never opened it. Inside were dozens of savings bonds bundled together with rubber bands. Some looked so old the paper had started yellowing around the edges. Walter smiled when he saw my confusion. He explained that he had started buying them when Ethan was 10 years old. Every birthday, every work bonus, every extra dollar he could spare, he bought another bond. He had been saving for a future grandchild long before that child existed. When we added everything together, the bonds were worth nearly $47,000. I sat there speechless. Then Walter told me something I will never forget. He said if we simply handed over an envelope, people would spend the money and forget where it came from. He wanted the gift to mean something. He wanted our grandchild to understand the love behind it. So he asked me to hide the bonds inside something handmade, something that would last, something the family would treasure. That was one of the last promises I made to him. After he passed away, I spent for months knitting the most beautiful baby blanket I had ever created. My hands suffer from arthritis now, and every row felt like a battle. Some nights I cried while working on it because every stitch reminded me of Walter. The blanket was cream-colored with blue sailboats stitched around the border because Walter loved the water. In one corner, I quietly added his initials. Inside the lining, I created a hidden pocket. The bonds went into that pocket. So did a letter Walter dictated from his hospital bed for the grandchild he would never meet. When I finished, I felt like I was holding a piece of my husband in my hands. Then came the baby shower. Lauren loved expensive things. Her mother, Diane, believed every item in life should have a recognizable brand attached to it. Designer clothes, designer furniture, designer handbags. If something did not have a label, they assumed it had no value. I always knew Lauren looked down on me a little. I just never realized how far it went. The shower looked more like a luxury product launch than a family gathering. Everything was perfectly staged for photographs. Gifts were opened in front of cameras. Guests admired brand names more than the people giving them. Still, I arrived excited. I carried Walter's final gift wrapped in simple paper tied with a blue ribbon. I honestly believed everyone would appreciate the thought behind it. I was wrong. When Lauren finally reached my present, the room became quiet. She opened the package and unfolded the blanket. For one brief moment I smiled. Then I watched her expression change. She immediately realized it was handmade. Lauren held it up and examined it like someone inspecting a bargain bin purchase. Then she laughed. Not a kind laugh. The kind of laugh that tells everyone else they should laugh too. She glanced toward her friend who was filming the event. Then she said something I will remember for the rest of my life. We only use designer things for this baby. The room erupted with nervous laughter. And before anyone could react, Lauren walked to a nearby trash can and dropped the blanket inside. Just like that, for months of work, Walter's final gift, 30 years of savings, his last letter, everything disappeared into a garbage can while people laughed. I looked across the room at my son. Ethan looked shocked, but he said nothing. That hurt even more than what Lauren had done. For a few seconds, I considered telling everyone exactly what was hidden inside. I could have exposed everything right there, but I did not. Instead, I walked calmly to the trash can. I reached inside. I pulled out the blanket, folded it neatly, placed it in my purse. Then I quietly left. Nobody stopped me. Nobody apologized. Nobody understood what had almost happened. I cried during the drive home, not because of the money, because my husband's final act of love had been treated like garbage. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. His voice sounded strange, panicked, broken. Apparently my sister-in-law had told him what was hidden inside the blanket after I left the party. The moment he learned the truth, everything changed. "Mom, please tell me you took the blanket home." I told him I had. The relief in his voice was immediate. Then came the question, what was inside it? I told him everything. The bonds, the letter, the 30 years of saving, the inheritance meant for his child. For several seconds he could not speak. Then he started crying. Not quietly, not politely, the kind of crying that comes from realizing you failed someone you loved. He kept repeating the same sentence. I was standing right there and I did nothing. For the first time in years, my son saw exactly what his silence had cost. A few days later he confronted Lauren. She did not apologize. Instead, she blamed me. She claimed I should have warned her. She said nobody hides money inside a blanket. She insisted the whole thing was somehow my fault. That response told me everything I needed to know. At that moment I made a decision. The money would still go to my grandson, but it would never pass through Lauren's hands. I met with an attorney and created an education trust. Every dollar would remain protected until my grandson was old enough to use it himself. No one could spend it. No one could borrow against it. No one could touch it. A month later, after the baby was born, I invited the entire family to my house. Lauren came, Diane came, Ethan came carrying the baby, and sitting in the center of my dining table was the blanket. We shared dinner first, then I placed my hand on the blanket and told everyone it was time to properly give Walter gift. The room instantly became tense. I opened the hidden pocket. One by one, I placed the bonds on the table. Then the letter. Nobody said a word. Lauren's face turned completely white. I explained how Walter had spent 30 years preparing for a grandchild he might never meet. I explained what the bonds were worth. Then I held up the letter, the final words of a grandfather to his grandson. The same letter Lauren had thrown away for a joke. She immediately tried defending herself. She said she did not know. She said I had set her up. She said anyone would have made the same mistake. I simply shook my head. No, the mistake was not failing to find the money. The mistake was believing something handmade could not possibly be valuable. That was the lesson, not the money, the blanket. The room stayed silent. Then I revealed the trust. I told them every dollar belonged to the baby and would remain protected until adulthood. Lauren looked stunned. Ethan nodded quietly. He understood why I had done it. Then I read part of Walter's letter aloud. In it, he wrote that the greatest gift his own grandfather ever gave him was knowing someone had been thinking about him before he even existed. He wanted our grandson to have that same feeling. By the time I finished reading, Ethan was crying again. Even Diane had nothing left to say. For the first time, everyone understood what had really been inside that blanket. Not money, love, patience, sacrifice, 30 years of hope. The months that followed brought changes I never expected. My son stopped avoiding conflict. Lauren finally began seeing the consequences of her behavior. She even asked me to teach her how to knit. I said yes, not because she deserved forgiveness, because my grandson deserved a family that could still grow. Today the trust continues growing quietly. The blanket rests in my grandson's nursery, and every time I see it, I think about Walter. The world teaches people to judge value by labels, prices, and appearances. But the most important things rarely come with a logo. Sometimes they arrive wrapped in simple paper, sometimes they look ordinary, and sometimes the greatest treasure in the room is the very thing someone foolish enough almost threw away. That is the lesson my family learned the hard way, and it all started with one handmade blanket sitting in a trash can.